Hello, and welcome to a probably short-ish video written in response and as a submission to Loss of Lieutenant's monthly challenge for September. Now, full disclosure, this is my second attempt recording this after OBS 8, the first one, so I may sound a little tired and a little weary. But hey, I've had a practice run, so hopefully it'll be a reasonably good listen. So first up, the challenge is on the screen there. For the month of September, play a game with a list that is designed to hit hard on the first turn. There's some discussion there about what is more effective in N4, going first or going second, and two interesting conflicting perspectives. So they mention the general perspective that in N4 there is easier access to cheaper and more effective beat sticks. We've seen the buffing of certain units, the semi-buffing of close combat, heavy armor and tags are nominally cheaper, and of course those are fast, aggressive pieces, making going first generally perceived to be the better path to victory. I'd add that in addition to this, ablative defenses are harder to establish in N4 with a strictly limited 15 trooper limit, also making aggressive plays potentially more powerful. But this contrasts with Melbourne's perspective, which is that in Melbourne, going second and null deploying being the act of completely refusing engagement with your opponent, putting up no ARO pieces, and putting the onus entirely on your opponent to cross the board and engage you in your deployment zone, seems to be the go-to strategy for many of their players, and that it is seeing success. So the purpose, therefore, of this challenge is to push extremely aggressive play, even in ITS, where scenarios tend to favor going second or at least, but do not actively punish going first, and see how much damage you can inflict on the first turn while keeping your eye on the mission. And some things that they've asked players to consider: how many attack pieces should you have? Where should your attacks originate from? Should you feel a tag? What happens if your opponent chooses to go first? And how do you survive an alpha? So I have a few sort of things to say and think about those list of questions. But first we're going to do a short battle report. After that, I will just run through a couple of army lists that I like to play that I think engage with both the idea of going first when you need to well, and more generally sort of answer some of those questions about how do you build a list with those things in mind. But first, let's have a look at this battle. Now, I have actually reconstructed this entirely. This is a table as it stood at the conclusion of deployment of a game that I played recently. Now, my opponent has asked that their identity remain secret for this, and I have obliged because it was a doozy of a game, and you'll soon see why. So, I have won the role, and mindful of the challenge issued by Loss of Lieutenant for the month of September, I've chosen to go first. Now I'm playing Hassassin Bahram, and the scenario is Supremacy. My observation of this map is that the deployment zones are quite porous and susceptible to enfilade, and in particular, if you look at this piece of terrain, for example, just outside the deployment zone, it has some aggressive lines of fire right up the guts. And this is mirrored actually identically by this piece of terrain into this deployment zone. So I was sort of inclined to go first anyway. Supremacy as a scenario obviously does encourage going second, and the reason why it encourages going second is that it is extremely order efficient to score if you are the second player, because you can move pieces reactively in response to how your opponent has positioned on the board efficiently with minimal possible expenditure of orders and application of force to score the scenario turn on turn on turn. You will have the scoring advantage. The counterplay, obviously, is that if you are going first, you can push aggressively and attempt to destroy points and resources that your opponent has so that they have fewer elements to contest. And generally, if you're going first in Supremacy, you want to set the line of engagement really far up the table if you can, so that it is difficult for your opponent to push pieces into your quadrants and thus score them. Often easier said than done. Typically, I find that if you're going first in Supremacy, a scoring advantage does not manifest until turn 2 at the earliest, and overextension can be punished, but it's something to think about. In this scenario, though, I had annihilation on my mind. There is a bit of an adage: any scenario is annihilation if you try hard enough. Not always the case, but it's a fallback plan if need be. So I'm playing Hassassins. As mentioned, this is just before the reserve step. This is as the game state is. I've spent a command token to reserve 2 models, and people who are familiar with Hassassin's may see where this is going, but let's run through my deployment. So high value target is deployed here outside the deployment zone. I have 3 camouflage markers with no mimetism. So those are Dolami, obviously. In this case, they all have, I believe, shotguns and Panzerfausts. I've actually reconstructed this a little bit from memory. There may be some details that are off about the lists if you try and reconstruct things, but it should be broadly accurate and will serve as a demonstrator. I have a ready-to-form core link team here of Yara Haddad, 2 Bereed hackers, one of whom is my lieutenant. This is a slightly risky play, by the way. There is an attempt here to build a more ARO-capable info war game, but a hacker lieutenant is a risky play I mean, I don't have a lot of veterans. I don't have a chain of command. I'm being a little ballsy with this, but not punished in this particular case. So 2 Bereed hackers, both of them being the same kind of hacker, among other things, means that they can use the same AROs after they've fired out pitches with their core link bonuses. A Ghulam NCO, amazing piece, staple of the faction, one of the best things about both Hassassin Bahram and the Rama Task Force, and actually I believe it's also in QK. And then an Asawira Doctor rounding out the link. One of my favorite pieces. I love Asawira Doctors. They're amazing gunfighters, they're great at close combat, and they are a doctor that regenerates. Just like 5 points undercosted because of the frenzy benefit. They're just amazing. Over here we then have a duo of an Asawira Spitfire and an Asawira Doctor. Again, Asawira are incredible pieces, possibly the best heavy infantry for cost in the game. Just truly, truly outstanding. I have found that a duo of them is equally as serviceable as a more expensive Haris. You can run a 4-man core and flip Yara into this, but there is no special reason to, basically. You lose 1 point of burst, but by running only a duo, you extend less risk when you move up to attack. And having the 2 of these also makes them very capable of move dodging, pseudo 6-4 movement when you need them to be, which a slower wildcard troop like a Moya would not be able to do. Then I have an unlinked Ghulam hacker who is in the second combat group, if I remember correctly. A Shayatana remote, that's the guided missile launcher. A flash pulse bot, everything is prone, by the way, and the 3 camouflage markers. So that's 13 models and 2 reserves. Now, this, by the way, is a mistake in deployment. I wasn't looking really particularly closely at the table. I was thinking more about some other things that I was going to do. And this is a bad position for Yara Haddad. And the reason why it's bad is that if she wants to move out of the deployment zone, because again, this is Hassassin's, you're kind of locked into 24-inch range-bound weapons, she's going to have to probably cross, or the link team is going to have to funnel through this alleyway. And that means that they are easily opposed by my opponent, who has deployed not 1, but 2 Karhu Fuebacks watching it. So I am basically, my link team is bisected by a line that overwhelming ARO firepower is opposing. So that sucks. Not going to end up being punished for it, but that really, I should be, as much as possible, more behind this building so that I can engage, I can move around this way if I want to move into the midfield. The downside of that is it exposes you to more vulnerability, again, from enfilade fire, but in this case, I really should have seen this long line. So this is a core link, or at least it will be post-deployment. 2 Fusilier combis, one of whom is the Lieutenant, Fusilier Paramedic, and 2 Karhu. Simple, extremely effective, very strong. Possibly 1 more Karhu than necessary, but this is a little bit of a meme list, because over here we can see a Haris of 2 more Karhu Fuebacks and a Karhu Paramedic. So 2 Paramedics and 4 Karhu, both with Fuebacks. And again, these guys, stacked AROs, looking down this line. So leaving the deployment zone is pretty hard. It's difficult. This is a lot of gun. It's supported by a Peacemaker with a heavy shotgun and Oxbot. Now, again, this is deploying in the deployment zone. Why are they doing that? Well, I just mentioned I'm playing Hassassin for day and I reserved 2 troops. My opponent is rightly being extremely paranoid about Hassassin for days. And is deploying as best as possible to restrict their ability to attack. So Fugazi Dronebot and the Oxbot blocking the path up these stairs. Palbot blocking the path up the ladder. Karhu blocking the path off the ladder. Karhu Paramedic split down here so that an attack up here can't also kill the Paramedic. Basically any Fidei that deploys here is going to get shotgun and flamethrowered. Back here we have a Machinist, and it's got a couple of Palbots scattered around, and that's because there are 2 Peacemakers in this list. One of them is his reserve. Reserving a Peacemaker, also a good idea if you expect Hassassin for days, because you can say I deploy a Fidei in here, for example. You can pinch it off with 2 models as your reserves because the Peacemaker deploys its Oxbot. And then there's just some Fugazi around the place, and I think there's 3, and a Pathfinder Dronebot. So that's the state before I deploy my reserves. Noting that I'm trying to basically launch an aggressive as possible alpha, I elect to deploy, and roll to enter the deployment zone to Hassassin for days with the ACCWs. The first one rolls to deploy prone here, and it succeeds. The second one rolls to deploy prone here, and it succeeds. Odds of succeeding 2 whip 15 rolls, better than, you're more likely to succeed both than fail one of them, but this is still a particularly risky play. I would probably not have made it if I wasn't as penned in by basically a good deployment as I had been, and if I basically didn't think that I needed to do this to push the risk. Push the risk, clear this off, and potentially win the game at a stroke. If both of these had failed, I would probably have had to have pulled back very defensively, started using cautious movements, just to try and maybe get an Asawira up into range to engage. Use the Dalami probably relatively extensively, which is tricky because I think they're all in the second group, so limited orders. But try and kind of rely on my defensive ability as a Hassassin player. Maybe even fall back on, like, have the Bareed slice the pie around here to draw line of fire down to there, but not the Kahu with the pitcher. But that's actually even pretty bad because he can be seen by this Kahu through this window. So like it's rough if I don't land at least one of these, but landed both. His reserve drop is a Peacemaker with an Oxbot, and basically the position of everything is there's no space for an Oxbot up here. He elects just to deploy to, and it's something like this. He elects just to deploy to stop Dalamis from coming up and ruining his day even further. So it's something like there, or there. But it's not going to end up being particularly material to the game because he spends a command token, he strips 2 orders, which takes my combat group 1 from 10 orders to 8. The first order of the game, this Hassassin for day, staying prone, crawls into melee with this Kahu. That reveals it. Both Kahus are now obliged to ARO. Both of them declare attacks with their fourbacks using explosive. And now the reason that they don't fire their pistols is that he needs to kill this Fidei, and he's willing to accept basically casualties here because he has a paramedic down there. As it happens, both Kahu so the Fidei declares ballistic skill attack with surprise shot, putting both Kahu on -6, and both of them miss both of their shots. And the shotgun templates, which she lays down over both Kahu, kill this one and render this one unconscious. And she survives. The second order of the game, this Fidei activates. She crawls into close combat. Every trooper shoots, and she lays down 2 templates. The first one over this Kahu onto this paramedic, the second one over this Kahu onto this Kahu. This Kahu dies, this Kahu goes unconscious, this paramedic goes unconscious. This time the Fidei does not survive, and unsurprisingly, she's taking 4 unopposed combi shots and 4 unopposed foureback shots, and there is no surprise because it's a core link. But that's basically the game. In 2 orders, I've just killed 6 SWC worth of guns. There is no weapon in this list with a range band better than a flash pulse or a combi rifle. All he has are basically peacemakers as viable offensive elements and basically a Kahu paramedic. This Kahu paramedic is terribly positioned because this Fidei is still alive. It's probably going to euthanize this Kahu and then re-impersonate, or it might kill this Kahu and then just attempt to kill whatever it can down here. I have a plethora of options, and the fact that both of these Kahu and the paramedic went down meant that this situation is now also unrecoverable. On top of that, I still have 6 orders in my primary combat group, which I can spend on Asawiras, firing pitches, pressing buttons, launching a guided missile strike if I want to. And I have 5 orders, admittedly 3 irregular, in my second combat group, which I can use to attack with the Dalami, probably, and just kill whatever I can. I am actually unlikely to secure a significant scoring advantage on the first turn, but it just doesn't matter. This situation is so cooked that my opponent quite rightfully just concedes the game, and that's it. That's the conclusion of my battle report. So that ends the battle report portion of my submission to Loss of Lieutenant. Guys, thank you very much as always for running these. I would say this was a successful test of an attempt to alpha strike. But let's expand this discussion out a little bit and talk about the nature of the question that they've asked and lists that I run and things that I consider when I'm building a list relative to the questions that they've asked there. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about here, actually just generally, and which again I've talked about once already, but OBS ate the recording, is the idea of what I would call defensive equilibrium. And it's very relevant. It's a very relevant concept when talking about these things that they've raised, where they find null deployment going second effective. The general perception is that going first is better. Those are perspectives that are obviously at odds. What to make of this? And the concept I find really useful is defensive equilibrium. So, what is defensive equilibrium? It's really a way of referring to and thinking about whether or not aggression is a favorable strategy or a favored strategy in a game. A game's defensive equilibrium can favor aggression, or it can favor defense, or it can sit at approximately an equilibrium point. And in particular, defensive equilibrium will usually shift over time. This is a really useful concept actually in both Magic the Gathering and StarCraft, because those games are typically, or StarCraft historically, those games are typically in states of flux and iteration. So the classic example is Magic the Gathering, first week of a new set. Now, disclaimer, I am not a good Magic the Gathering player. I enjoy watching Magic the Gathering content, but this is still a useful concept. If you are playing, say, on Arena, and you are grinding the ladder, and you are interested in reaching Mythic rank on Magic the Gathering Arena, then one of the best ways to rapidly accumulate points is to play an extremely aggressive red deck wins or white weenie archetype super aggro list in the first and second week of a new set. Sometimes not even the second, first week of a new set. And the reason why is that defensive equilibrium at the beginning of a meta, of a new release, of a change in the game, typically favors aggression. For the simple reason that to learn how to defend, other people must first be attacking, must have learned how to attack. You all the cycle of learning always includes successfully learning to attack first, because you can't learn to establish a successful defense until you know what you are defending against. It is inherently reactive to learn to defend. So early in an iteration cycle in a new meta or release, aggression is favored, because again, in Magic the Gathering, people are trying their combo decks, they're trying new concepts, they're testing things out, and they don't yet know what is a successful aggressive strategy in the meta. Red deck wins is kind of pretty typical. You can make some guesses, but successfully building like tweaking your late game combo / control / whatever deck, even your mid-range deck, right? Tweaking a mid-range deck to find the right inflection point between being able to defend against early aggression and actually having enough punch to play the kind of game that you want in mid-range or control, requires knowing where the tempo is for those aggressive decks. And so until those aggressive decks figure it out, you can't figure it out. So aggression early on is an extremely effective strategy. Has this played out in wargaming? Yes, on a much, much wider scale. And the reason for that is that wargames iterate slowly. Think about how many games the entire Magic the Gathering Arena community is playing in the first week of a new set release. Think about how many games you as an Infinity player have played literally since N4 released a year ago, almost exactly a year ago today. Even players who play a lot, and for the first 6 to 8 months, I think, of N4's release, I managed to play almost 3 games a week most of the time, which is a lot because we were in lockdown, and what else were we going to do? And we're still in lockdown because the Sydney sneeze made it across the border. That's lots of play. Typically for wargamers, you get to play 1 game a week is good going, because it takes time and investment, and it takes 2 hours to play a game of Infinity usually. It takes 15 minutes to play a game of Magic, give or take. And you can queue back up immediately. There's no setup, there's no teardown. The iteration cycle in a game like MTG is much, much more rapid, which is why the introduction of novelty into the game has to be more rapid. Sets in MTG are released very quickly. Major changes in wargames are released much more slowly. because their novelty lasts a lot longer. But it means that the defensive equilibrium takes longer to settle or shift. What did we see in the first 6 months even of Infinity N4's release? Quite a lot of success attributed to aggressive play. JSA, for example, were a terror, like a reported terror, for the first many months of N4, to the point where people were like, "This is broken. This is intolerable." It wasn't, as it turns out. Like right now, Melbourne has seen a shift in defensive equilibrium towards defense. In fact, a considerable shift to the point where they consider it to be more favorable to go second. In comparison to how powerful aggression was sort of shown as being early on in the meta. And in this case, early on means, yeah, like the first 8 months, the first 12 months almost, because it's a war game. And there were other, other aggressive things. JSA leaps out to me because I had a number of conversations with really competent players playing as and playing against JSA and just sitting there being like, Jesus, tankers are really good for 17 points. Holy hell. And again, it's not surprising that that saw early success because people had not learned how to defend against it at the time because all of the tools were different. The rebalance was significant. It takes time to defend, time to learn to defend. If I play against JSA today, I respect them. I probably don't let them take first turn if I'm feeling sort of particularly confident about how good my opponent is and how aggressively they play. But I don't consider the matchup overwhelming, as good as 17-point tankers are. There are ways and means. So this is just a really interesting case study generally in defensive equilibrium in a miniatures wargame. Now, to complement that, you also have to think about the defensive equilibrium is also something that exists between players and opponents and factions. It will be different. Melbourne have shown a kind of there's a general perspective in contrast to a general perspective that they perceive in the game from other metas about what is better. But you can actually influence defensive equilibrium between yourself and your opponents, and you can do that through your choice of faction, through how you play, through what you're prepared to do. If you are a player who learns to be aggressive and plays aggressively well, then your opponents will, one, they will learn to defend, right? Because we learn when we play one against one another. But two, they will begin to adopt strategies like not letting you go first, which means that you are more likely to go second, which means that you can learn how to play defensively. And if you enjoy playing defensively, you'll get to do so more often. In a weird kind of way, there's this old and probably slightly controversial adage, if you seek peace, prepare for war. In Infinity, if you want to go second regularly, learn how to go first, aggressively and hard. Take this game that we just saw, right? If I play Hassassin Bahram against this same opponent again in future, and he wins the lieutenant role, there is a significantly diminished likelihood that he will pick deployment, and he will certainly not choose to go second, given that particular choice. Because, right, he's seen what can happen. He has seen the catastrophic failure state that can materialize if he does so. He is likely to want to go first, even in a scenario that doesn't necessarily advantage going first. Or alternatively, he will go away and he will think a lot about how he might have defended against this Hassassin Fidei attack. And there were ways, by the way, particularly if I'll just minimize this. This Kahu deployment up here, it actually would have been possible, I think, to totally preclude a Hassassin Fidei deploying on this rooftop. And I think to do so, really all he needed to do was have that Kahu a little bit further across. Now, the problem with this, obviously, is that they stop being quite as stacked. There's a likelihood I can engage both at once. He wanted to leave the gap there, but this would have been functionally Fidei-proof. I'd have had to deploy the Fidei on the ladder, and I'd have only had one shot doing this. He could have dodged, basically, and shot with other things. So he'll have had a chance to go away and think about that. If he's watching this video, hey, didn't name you, and I didn't make the no, that's too obvious. Let's call her L. Simpson joke I was going to either. So with all that kind of said, and this piece about defensive equilibrium that I wanted to get off my chest and onto the internet said, let's have a look at some lists. So here we are. I've just got the challenge back up on screen again. So some things to consider. How many attack pieces should I have? Where should my attacks originate from? Should I fill the tag? Am I capable of surviving an alpha if I go second? So this list here is one of my favorite Hack Islam lists. And it's one actually I've very slightly tweaked it recently. But there's like a small change that I've made just recently, but I'm dead keen to play this again. Haven't played Hassassin in a little while. I've been playing Combined Army and Dashat because Fiddler came out and I think she fits well in Dashat. But this is just a really nice list. And it answers some of those questions about can you attack, and if so, how. So I'll just run through it particularly quickly. Saladin is a lieutenant. He solves your command token needs. He fixes the number of basically he lets you take more irregular orders than you would otherwise. Lets you swap around combat groups. Not an always take because 36 points is really expensive for functionally a passive lieutenant. But he's even a repeater, which actually is kind of useful. I wish he was cheaper. There are other better lieutenants in a very similar kind of role, but he's what we have, and he's still very, very useful. Azrael with AP heavy machine gun. Really important thing to note about this piece is that it's not an attack piece. It is only ballistic skill 13. It is, even with burst 4, it is very, very easy for this to fail a face-to-face roll and just fucking die. And Azrael is a piece that needs setup. I actually try and land Spotlight on things before I engage with it surprisingly often. Do not engage Mimetism modified or marksmanship core link pieces. Don't fight a Bagmarie in a core link. Don't fight a Kamau. Don't fight a Grenzer or Sniper. You'll probably just lose the face-to-face roll over and over again and die. The Azrael is there to prevent people from using their tags as Overwatch pieces, which you absolutely can do and you should sometimes. We'll get to that with the second list I'm going to show you, or possibly the third. But the Azrael threatens tags. A tag is a good Overwatch piece because it is very, very robust, and an Azrael will fucking slap you. Ballistic skill, continuous damage, armor piercing, +1. It's terrifying if it hits. So this requires some setup. It's not actually one of our attack pieces, except under limited circumstances. Then we have Yara Haddad and Amukta. So this is a vanilla faction. Both of these are MSV2 pieces with good ballistic skill in a list with probably just enough smoke. And I say just enough. I would like more, but you can't have everything. Yara Haddad gives you armor-piercing rounds to engage enemy heavy armor. The Mukhtar gives you Red Fury to engage enemy light infantry. Between the two of them, this is just good MSV gunfighting. It's not Apex Predator stuff. It's not necessarily going to overwhelm like a core link team. Although a Mukhtar can do it a surprising amount of the time. I consistently find that because of 6-2 movement, Mukhtars being very good native climbers because they've got 6 inches of climbing. Get up in high places surprisingly often and find plunging fire onto rooftops. They're very mobile and they can sometimes, if you get inside range as well, I just find Mukhtars surprisingly more capable than you would usually expect of engaging an enemy link, but mostly attack/predation pieces. Acid Wear Doctor, because it's amazing for reasons I spoke about before, with 2 Nazmats. You've got a hacking package, that turns into a guided missile package with a bereed hacker, a bereed killer hacker, and a guided missile remote. This is probably my favorite 3 models in package in the game. You have 2 models that are ballistic skill 12 with pitchers and rifles. You have Whip 14 hacking, including actually a really, really good killer hacker thanks to Trinity -3, and a guided missile remote for a total package. It's also cheap. It's 42 points or 47 points in 2 SWC. It's actually reasonably costed almost just for orders. And you get, if you need it, AROs, aggressive hacking, and guided missile attacks. You won't find a better 3 pieces of capability. And there are times going first when you just need to, this is what you need. If there's just no other way to solve a problem, guided missiles are your plan C. Also, as a point, Melbourne has recently evidenced some complaint about guided missile remotes. But let's recall, what was it that they said about things that they are finding successful? Going second and null deploying. One of the circumstances when guided missiles become more effective than usual, outsized effectiveness, is when your opponent is fully null deploying. And the reason why is that a guided missile attack is usually an inefficient attack. It's inefficient because you need to spend orders establishing your pitcher network, your repeaters. That also, like, you're expending resources in terms of both orders and material because pitchers are relatively limited. This list has no baggage, for example. And then you need to roll a spotlight, which costs orders, and then if you succeed, you need to roll a guided missile, which is a burst one attack, which also needs to, basically it's extremely order intensive. Null deployment, that is to say deployment that does not in any way contest your attempts to establish a pitcher network, make guided missile attacks more efficient. Because the pitcher network can be established efficiently, you can proceed straight to the attack part. One of the ways to stop guided missile attacks is to disincentivize them by making them less efficient, and one of the ways that you do that is you present some AROs. You attempt to exert some control over your opponent's ability to extend their repeater network, thus making a guided missile attack as inefficient as it is balanced around being. If you are totally null deploying, you might get wrecked by guided missiles. So consider when you are thinking about your defensive mix, right? When the defensive equilibrium and you're considering how you defend against a list like this. How many guns do I have? Well, I have some active firepower. Not bad, frankly, active firepower for a vanilla faction. There's no tag. There's no brute force solution. Put up a linked gun if you've got one. Even consider deploying flash pulse remotes as ARO pieces, because anything that I have to just stop and engage with rather than beelining to place repeaters means that basically you further and further diminish the chances that I even want to go for a guided missile attack in the first place. And then we have Zalekia. Who's the best? She may not be the best biker in absolute terms in the game. That's probably Carmen Johns, maybe, but Carmen Johns is in like 1.5 factions, and they're not good. Hacker, excellent. But anyway, Rama Task Force, like in Hakkislam, yeah, I'll give that one a miss, even for Carmen. Zalekia is just incredible, and she is a super aggressive attack piece. Doesn't have to be, right? You can reserve her, like you could keep her back, but she's just extremely strong. Again, how do you deal with that? Well, you try and contest her ability to advance. You do not null deploy. If you null deploy against Zalekia, she's going to fucking ruin you. However, she and this list, actually I'll go through the rest of it and then I'll raise a point that I wanted to about one of the questions they asked, because it's a good question. Second combat group, super light on. Remember though, it's Saladin, things can move around. It's a 9 and 6 split for that reason, because if I want to, I can move this, like say this Fidei into the first combat group for free. But it's a Fanus Flash Pulse Remote, a Fidei. It's the totally cheap Fidei because I'm mostly using her for the light shotgun. It's going to make a really aggressive... Basically, she's a link decapitator if I need one. I don't find that I want to like make heavy order investment melee attacks with Fideis as much anymore. I would put a DACW on her if I could, but this list is running super light on points. So there are not a lot of ways to trim the fat. Libertos and 2 Delamy. This is just like a super cheap, super good midfield. Thumbs up. Can this list defend? Yes. And then a biker with a light shotgun and DACW. This could be a place where I could lose 1 point to put a DACW on the Fidei. I could downgrade the biker to just have a chain rifle. I really like the shotgun on it though. If it gets to attack, 2 templates rather than 1 is a big deal. And again, DACW, I'd be losing it down to a shock CCW just to upgrade the Fidei. Your mileage may vary. Another option would be, for example, to cut the Nazmat, which you actually definitely could do. I like having 2, but it's a bit of a luxury. And honestly, you could exchange the biker generally for a Ghazi Matawiya. So a very viable change would be to remove that and remove the biker and just find ourselves Ghazi Matawiya. I've gone too far. There it is. I always get it wrong because it doesn't say Ghazi up there. And chuck in the wonderful 9-point boarding shotgun Emarat. A biker has higher fizz for smoke, etc., but it's also more vulnerable. This Ghazi would be very easy to just shepherd around and have escort Yara or the Mukhtar. Anyway, either way. One of the things I wanted to just mention with regards to this list is, so think about these questions. How many attack pieces should I have? As many as possible. You only have 15 troops in a list. As many of them should be able to viably undertake action as you can. Now, that's kind of the privilege of the vanilla player, for obvious reasons. If you are a sectoral player, then you are fielding links, which force multiply individual troopers. And in particular, kind of the archetype of the core link is in N4 at present, pretty often, sometimes it's a pain train, but pretty often it's like 4 cheerleaders slash paramedics slash hackers, utility pieces, right? Like they can be useful models, but often it's like 3 or 4 kind of just non-aggressive, offensively oriented pieces with one big gun. But in vanilla, you aren't and can't make that trade. You don't get the Uber gun. So instead, you diversify your assets. And by doing so, you should have as many pieces as you can be aggressive attack pieces. In this list, almost everything is able to undertake pretty decisive action. The Fanus can't. Saladin doesn't want to. Literally everything else is geared to do something. So that's 13 troops that are potential sources of danger for my opponent. That's really good. Where should attacks originate from? Don't lock yourself into a thought on this. The answer to this question is actually wherever it is most efficient and least risky for those attacks to originate from. Which is like a cop-out slash no-dur answer, but for real. If you have as many options as you can and you're thinking about how to attack your opponent and you need some kind of a prism to make that decision, what do you choose? Well, you choose, right, and you'll find yourself just doing this anyway, you will choose the most efficient, least risky option. So how is an attack efficient? If it needs few orders to reach its destination. If it's likely to be, how is an attack not risky? If it's likely to be successful. If it exposes few points or models to risk. So for example, an attack across the board with a core link on the first turn is order intensive because it is crossing the entire table, so it's expending resources, and 2, it's risky in the sense that it is exposing a large part of your army to danger. Why, therefore, do people do it? Why would JSA YOLO a samurai link across the table? Well, so in JSA, for example, many of those pieces are cheap and they have extra orders, so they can compensate for the resource expenditure. And then 2, the expectation is kind of that the actual models that are at the pointy end are tankos, who are 17 points or thereabouts. The light shotgun profile is the best. And those pieces, therefore, are not actually exposing your army to as much risk and are very likely to be successful. And in fact, because tanko has multiple wounds and armor and is linked, if it can be delivered, the whole rubric is looking pretty good. In an army like this one, in vanilla, where should my attacks originate from? Well, has my Fide successfully rolled to reach the enemy deployment zone, or has it just found a good point outside the deployment zone where it can make a kill in a single order? That's a good attack. That's where an attack should originate from. Has my opponent completely null deployed, therefore letting me move my pitches forward easily? Maybe do a coordinated order of Yara, the Mukhtar, and both Barids, and then potentially another one where I also coordinate firing out 2 pitches in different locations, thus staging for an attack and, readying a missile strike because my opponent has null deployed. That's where my attack should originate from. Note, at that attack, extremely, extremely low risk because you only expend material, basically, and orders making a guided missile strike if it's not contested. Has my opponent hunkered down but also managed to spread their pieces out so that a missile strike can't catch multiple things? Well, Zalekia is probably a go. Cross the table and hit the enemy deployment zone. So, these general questions, you want to have as many ways to engage this as possible. One of the biggest kind of risks that you can build into a list is not having multiple ways to conduct those engagements. And even if you deploy everything in the deployment zone, that can be totally fine as long as you've got, 1, the resources to move out, and 2, different ways to launch attacks. So, for example, one of my favorite Akari lists has a big gun in a core link, which does not expect to leave the deployment zone much, and will fight from the DZ. And if there is nothing opposing it, then it won't launch an attack because it can't engage anything. But then I will have Scarface, who is fast and brings his own orders, and I will have a Haris of Daiokai, NCO, and 2 Tankos. Again, they bring orders thanks to the NCO order, and those will be split across groups often. And then you'll have bikers. You'll have your Jimbo and Desperados. You won't usually have Yan-Yans because they got hit really hard by the FAQ about irregular orders, impetuous, and drop zone deployment, combat jump, but like multiple pieces, deployment zone bound, but fast orders, etc., they can leave the DZ. Should I field a tag? Well, this list doesn't, but we'll get to one of those in a second. Is this list capable of surviving an alpha if it goes second? Yes. I would like more repeater coverage, but Hack has limits in that respect. It's got 2 at least, plus the native deployment zone of the hackers. It has a doctor who has regeneration. It has reasonably tough troops-ish. And more importantly, no one casualty will really kill this list, although losing Saladin on the first turn sucks. Don't let that happen if you can. If you think you're in danger, just make him one of your reserve drops. So this is one of my favorite lists, and it engages quite well with these questions. Here is a combined army list. So this is the second of 2 that I wanted to show you. And I wanted to show you this mostly because it's a bit of an answer to the question of should I field a tag. Now, the reason why this question is being asked, like the tacit assumption here, is that tags are aggressive pieces. That is not how I personally like to use them, although it is kind of a style thing. So why would someone think that a tag is a good aggressive piece? Well, it is fast, 6-4 movement, typically. It brings its own orders, so it can leave the deployment zone effectively at limited resource cost. And it has big gun, it do the shoot, it's dangerous. These are all true things. I don't like attacking aggressively with tags because I do not think it is effective as using them as it is to use them as support pieces. And by that in particular, I mean fire support. A tag can be used very aggressively if you think it's useful and productive to do so, but consider the risk that you are assuming by attacking with a tag, in particular into any kind of a hacking defense. Catastrophic risk can materialize if you just walk through a repeated network and your opponent successfully total controls you. It can be easier to stop a tag than almost any other piece. In addition, if your opponent is null deploying, then a tag is often in a situation where they are engaging at bad range for their weapon. They cease being actually a truly effective face-to-face roll piece. You can find yourself in a situation where a tag is rolling like 4 dice on 8s. Non-ideal, right? That's not a good attack roll, even against a dodging opponent. By comparison, a tag that is used in a fire support role can use those orders that it has to clear the way for shorter range but fast aggressive attack pieces. And this list is a bit of a case study in that. So this is the list that I played in the Human Edge team tournament, and it is presently undefeated. It went, I think I dropped one OP in 5 games. Smashed through on all majors. I had a second list, which was an avatar list, but I didn't feel like playing it at any point because it felt riskier to play the avatar list. The avatar list was more concentrated in a couple of models. This list has diverse options. So how's it built? So 2 hackers, a Chironted Lieutenant hacker and an Umbra Samaritan hacker, and then in group 2, Bit and Kiss. This is like not quite Apex, but this is a ton of hacking presence without really compromising and going all in on hackers. So just really, really good hackers, by the way. There's Trinity in both groups. There's tons you can throw out. Oblivion, Spotlight, Carbonite, all as the same ARO. The Charonted is, in absolute terms, probably the best ARO hacker in the game because it's whip 16 with +1 damage. So Carbonites and Oblivions, like you don't just Spotlight in ARO, you don't just Oblivion. When Carbonite becomes damage 14, by the way, it begins to be better in many cases than Oblivion. More reliable, and if you like, it's also a really good, like Immobilize is a really good condition to inflict, especially if you are inflicting it at the same time as Spotlight and Oblivion, right? So if someone walks a heavy infantry into my repeater network, I will typically respond with Oblivion from Bit, Spotlight from the Umbra, Carbonite from the Chironted. That is like if all of those materialize, that is catastrophic. It's not just like, okay, I got Oblivion, that sucked, but my piece can still ARO. It's not like I got targeted, okay, that sucked, but I'll run away at the end of turn and I'll try and do something about it. I'll just, whatever, I'll kill the guided missile launcher. That is a total mobility kill, including a neg-2, even just 2 of them. Even just getting like, if Bit whiffs, getting a Spotlight and a Carbonite through means that you're resetting against Immobilized on -6. It's just good. It's just good hacking, and you're not really giving up much because Bit is kind of a pure hacker, but she's also your picture network. But the Umbra is hell on wheels and super dangerous and has a plasma weapon, right? You don't ever want to take face-to-face rolls with the plasma carbine expecting it to carry you. You want to. It's for targets of opportunity. If you get more than one model in a plasma carbine face-to-face roll, consider taking that shot because it's a huge template and it kills everything because it's plasma. If there's a link team and they're clustered, you can sometimes just take the plasma rifle shot and be like, I might not win the face-to-face roll. Reasonably tough, you probably survive, but the plasma splash can just kill everything around the model that is AROing you. And then again, the Charonted. It's a marker state capable, super heavy infantry with a plasma rifle. It's really, really good. Rest of the list, Libertos, no surprises. It's Libertos. It's really, really good. 3 Datarazai, super aggressive. Chain rifles +1 burst, all of this. This is the best Datarazai kit. Just extremely aggressive and extremely strong. And it's smoke, and because it's regular, you can do things like coordinate the Datarazai forward or back or whatever alongside other pieces, and then throw smoke wherever you need because the smoke is targetless. So you're not bound to the usual same target restrictions. Imatron, 2 R drones, and a missile launcher. Yeah, there was going to be a missile launcher in this list. I like guided missiles. I don't put them in every list, but I put them in a lot of lists, including Ariadne these days, because I want to force forward observers to be dangerous. But in this case, again, he's so much hacking, it's combined army hacking. It just makes sense. Also, missiles in vanilla, you're a little more incentivized. You are more likely in vanilla to hit a situation where there is an obstacle that is just numerically difficult to overcome, right? Because you don't have core linked guns yourself, you are more likely to need to engage asymmetrically. Now, it just so happens that that's one of my favorite things about Infinity, is that you can engage both conventionally and asymmetrically, so I like being able to do the latter, so I put missiles in my list because they're fun for me, but consider whether you need one. In this case, it's a good fit for the list, and here's the tag. It is the cheapest version of the Raicho. It is not the NCO profile, because you have a lieutenant who'll be productively spending orders. It's clocking in at 73, and that's cheap. That's a cheap tag. The heavy rocket launcher I actually really like. Like, the more I've played it, the more I found it to be better than a heavy flamethrower, because the tag is in a fire support role. It's operating mostly from the DZ, it's using its orders, it's suspending the second combat group, and having that HRL as an ARO piece actually is extremely relevant. The ability to splash multiple targets, for example, is very effective at pinning back warbands. A warband, like a Tega creature, coming up next, might well risk the move dodge against a long-range ARO, but if that long-range ARO is going to, on 17s, clip something else with a template, they probably won't do it. And I mentioned this before, I think tags actually are a really viable ARO piece. So when you say, should I fill the tag, it's not really an aggressive question for me. It's as much a defensive and resilient one. One of the things about tags, obviously, is that they're very, very tough. And if you think about the role of an ARO piece, even these things I was just talking about, right? You want to contest your enemy's ability to place down pitches. You want to contest really easy warbands movements. You don't need to stay on ARO the entire turn to do that. You just need to be able to stay on ARO long enough. And a tag is tough. So typically the best place to deploy a Raicho or any tag that you're using in a fire support role is in a position where it can guts back into cover even soon, right? Now, with a Raicho, you need to roll, and you need to roll whip 12. So sometimes she's too stubborn for her own good and stays out and dies. But even then, right, the point is that the ARO, an ARO does not need to be an ARO for the entire turn. It just needs to be an ARO for long enough to sap your opponent's resources and make their attacks ineffective. And tags are really good at this. Now, she's clocking in this list with absolutely zero support. The closest thing she has to support is hackers who can repossess her if she gets possessed. But a Raicho is really, really good at that. It can't be isolated, which means that it can always reset out of a carbonite state, which means people just possess it, which means you cancel the possession. It's not really going to be subject to debilitating electromagnetic attacks because, again, she'll just reset on 9s, and worst case, she's always giving you her order. But I extend this philosophy to other tags as well. If it's a remote presence tag, or it's like the Avatar, which is 1,000,000 points, yes, okay, bring an engineer because your investment needs... you need to make sure that investment sticks around. But like I've had great success with a nomad list that just has a salamander, and it doesn't have like, if it does have an engineer, well actually it probably does because Zoe and Pywall are excellent. But like if you don't take an engineer, it doesn't matter, and if you do, you don't use it. You don't try and repair that tag. It's just tough and a really big gun, and it's a really big gun that sits in the second combat group to open the way and present the threat that makes your opponent null deploy so that all of your attacks are effective against a null deployment. Like, look at this list. This list, like this first combat group, does not have long range engagement. You can jank some shots with the Charontid plasma rifle sometimes if it'll cop a splash. Like you might say, I'm going to engage that enemy link team at 30 inches and I'll roll to hit on 8s because one of those will land and clip 3 models, but that's kind of it, right? This is a short range aggressive attack piece, that is attack combat group that punishes null deployments. What lets me punish null deployments? A tag in the second group that can probably do enough work to make the enemy put their head down. The hardest games are when my opponents call my bluff and the riot show just doesn't manage to push through, which she won't sometimes against a really, really good ARO piece. She usually won't die, but like if there's a Bag Marie, if there's a Grenzer Sniper, if there's a Riot Girl missile launcher is the trickiest one because that's a missile launcher can do the damage. And you have to white noise to get inside of 24. But fortunately you can because the Charontid is excellent. So like you have to make sort of more technical plays, and again you have to spend sort of your entire turn. If your opponent puts the defensive pieces up, you have to be like, cool, yep, you got me. You have successfully stopped me from just running to your DZ with the Umbra and like move 6-inch dodge, move 6-inch dodge. Right, that gets you 6-4 movement. Move 6 inches and spotlight something, and then start getting into melee and killing things and harvesting Protheon, etc. But the Raichu is there as a fire support piece to engage with that. So, just having a quick look at these questions again. How many attack pieces should I have? Now, again, this is another kind of example, right, where it's vanilla, so there are many, many attack pieces. Now, this is less than Hak Islam, but that's something that you have to bear with when you're playing Combined Army. Imatron, Icadron, and 2 Imatrons, 2 R-drones, and an Icadron are your inactive pieces. So in this list, only 10 of the 15 are active tactical elements. That is about as low as I would want a list to be if it was vanilla. In sectorals, because you concentrate a bit more power, you can afford to have a slightly lower amount of active tactical elements, but I really wouldn't want to go below like 7. If you're like, I've seen some lists that are like it's 1 gun in a core link. Like as an example, that Panosciene list that we just saw. Tactical element, Kahu Harris. Tactical element, Kahu Core. 2 Peacemakers. That's 4 things that are capable of independent action. Now, the Kahu teams are very, very dangerous, and they concentrate so much force and have NCO orders that you can kind of get away with that risk, because the power that you exert in a single location is sufficiently powerful, and you're bringing enough resources that you can kind of meet that demand for resource efficient, low risk attacks. But that's like 4 as a vanilla player. That's a scary number. 4 individual points on which your army can like launch offensive operations means that you are very vulnerable to decapitation strike, which we saw. Right, I took out his 2 biggest tactical elements in 2 orders, meaning that he was left with literally just peacemakers, which are not enough by themselves. So I think that probably involves just about enough tooting of my own horn, and it probably is enough to wrap this up. Hope you've enjoyed this discussion of going first versus going second, alpha strikes versus defense. Thanks again, and as always, to Loss of Lieutenant for posting these challenges. They're super interesting. I hope to have gotten this up in time to have hit the end of September deadline. And again, if you want sort of one takeaway from this, which I'm actually sure is something that LOL covered on their podcast, the best way, if you find going second is what you like to do and you find that it is strongest, the best way to ensure that you get to enjoy that experience is learn how to aggressively attack, how to present such a danger to your opponents that they can't risk letting you go first rather, and therefore let you go second. As I mentioned before, if you want peace, prepare for war. Thank you very much.